Now, Dr. Karthik, I have a question for you, particularly about branding. You're in the thought leadership marketing sector. And as much as our action and intention is important, how we portray ourselves in public is as important. Can you speak a little bit about the strategies on how to brand from a CEO perspective that is aligned with intention and integrity?
Sure, sure. So interestingly, the area of focus that I look from marketing standpoint is around thought leadership. And I was reading somewhere that if you were to go to LinkedIn and type the word thought leader, there'll be over 1 million profiles which have the word thought leader given in it in some form or the other. But the fact of the matter is, a large percentage of them are actually not thought leaders, right? So thought leaders is essentially the unique value, the unique perspective, the expertise that you're able to bring to a table, but more importantly, how honestly you're bringing that to the table. So in my book, The Thought Leader Way, I cover some of the frameworks that organizations or individual consultants can use to establish that thought leadership effectively. So very importantly, I think one, there needs to be a clear focus on the customer. So if you're on an external facing role, it's about the end customer. But if you're a leader within an organization, your employees are your customers. So how do you look at that, right? So what is it that they are looking for? What is it that can make their lives better? And how can I contribute towards that? Right? I think that's a very important aspect which forms part of this thought leadership journey. The other thing which I would recommend would be building time effort into research, because unless you have thorough research and you understand things, you will not be able to give that unique perspective or give that unique solution that your customers inside or out are looking for. So investing in that research is another crucial aspect while you're building your brand. And the third element would be how consistent are you in what you're talking, how you're presenting yourself, because you can't be seen talking something and doing something else, right? So these three elements, if done well together, will help brands or leaders to position themselves as thought leaders. So there are a lot more of these frameworks and examples which I talk in my book, The Thought Leader Way, that's available on Amazon. I would encourage the viewers to take a look at that.
Yes, Jonathan, Dr. Jana, what is your experience with building company and branding, importance of branding and integrity?
Integrity is, it's everything. It is everything. At the end of the day, it's kind of like your good name, right? If you are seen to be doing things that are contrary to the values that you espouse, it's very, very difficult to come back from that. So I love it because, I do a lot of writing on Medium. So I'm like a top writer in diversity and disability on Medium. And I have some, especially since 2020, I have some very sharp opinions and positions about the treatment of people around the world, the treatment of people in the workplace. I believe that the workplace is the biggest learning laboratory that we have outside of structured education, and we're not leveraging it nearly enough in service of taking care of each other. And so for me, it's really important. I say things out loud, whether it's a TED Talk, one of my 6 books or whatever, so that people can do some easy research and see exactly what they're going to get. I'm not looking for the status quo, and people need to know that before they work with me so that it's not a surprise. So being very clear about your messaging and messaging that consistently and then backing it up. I would, caution people against the kind of work or consultancies where we say what we think people want to hear and then we give them whatever it is that they ask for. I love being highly specialized. I've been doing exclusively diversity work for decades. And so now at a time where years ago, people had no idea what it meant, what I did. And then now all of a sudden it becomes very, very important. People understand it. And I've been consistently beating the same drum and people can go back and find so much. So especially if you know what your niche is, you know where you want to be very consistent. And that thought leadership thing just follows. If you're showing work and you're leaving a trail behind you, suddenly you can find yourself in thought leadership status without even meaning to do so. And that's precisely what happened. I woke up in 2020 and there was, disaster across the world. And, the world had decided that I was a thought leader. It was nothing that I ever sought to do.
Really great. I mean, I'm just going to echo their two thoughts. Competency really comes from a few places. It comes from direct experience. It comes from consulting with somebody who has more direct experience. And then it comes from research or study of some kind. And so most of my direct experience is from mindfulness practice, from going in and finding my own authenticity and finding my own truth. And then how that gets translated in language from sort of experiential to some codified delivery, I think is essential. How you language your value is in part determines whether it's received or not. You can't be too invested, like Dr. Jana said, in who receives it or how it's received. I like to say, don't worry about whether one person doesn't want to be your client. Whatever your truth is, the right people will show up or the right organizations will show up. And then the consistency piece is everything. And for me, the consistency really falls more on tone than content. The content might change. When Gandhi was asked why he wrote different ideas on different things, he said, well, which one's the most recent? It's the one that's most true. Things evolve over time. This idea that leaders should have the same position 1 year versus the next when the context has changed completely, or criticizing presidents. I mean, this is so common. Like, oh, you said this 6 years ago this way. Why? Well, what? Are you serious? The context changes. And so to have it be a living document, whatever it is that is your truth, and be open to revision, because not revising is actually closed-minded. It's not a mature expression of integrity. And so that I think that's why my work has been well received. Is I this, Kate, I usually say I'm a good translator and I'm stubborn. Well, stubborn's just a funny way to say committed and anchored in what I believe. And so those are my suggestions. That consistency is everything. And I'll end with a metaphor. Water wears away stone every time. It doesn't stop and chip away at stone. It just keeps flowing, and you just keep flowing, and whatever stone is there will eventually get polished.
And that the journey is such magic, right? So it's like I don't make apologies for where I once stood. That there is a public record of my evolution, and that is okay. I think that more of us need to model that flexibility, right? People are so worried about being canceled and being called out, and the other thing, if the intention, I love that you talked about the intention, right? Because if I mean no harm in all things that I say, even if my position shifts or my tone shifts a little bit, whatever the case may be, I'm allowed to grow. And and for me, there's an invitation to allow you to watch me do that. And by seeing my own evolution and growth and the steps in that process, it's an invitation for you to do the same. We are holding each other accountable to unrealistic expectations, particularly in leadership. Leaders are not infallible. And that is one of the most powerful pieces of recommendation that I give to leaders is let people see that you're human. Show them that you're human, because it is when you act like a robot and you pretend that you can do no wrong and that everything that you say is, cannot be contradicted, is completely infallible. That's what makes you a target for, the various assaults by staff. Let people know that you're doing the best that you can. You're willing to evolve. You're willing to listen. You're willing to learn. And that's incredibly powerful. Be human alongside everybody you work with.
Wonderful.
Well, if I may start, first of all, thank you to all the speakers for the great insights that you gave us today. And there are a lot of things I could start with. Just a few things that I picked up on, and then I will lead to a question. What I really like is that in the conversation you had, you stress the importance of emotional intelligence. Is really what makes leaders, not just in the future, even today. We see it in many ways, but we need more of it. We need much more of it. I believe one thing, maybe I save this for a question. I'm probably the only one on the European side of the Atlantic Ocean here. And with the things about the Great Resignation, everything, we have slight different views. Also, the McKinsey study did, to my knowledge, not include countries like Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. And as you know, Germany, which is my home country, is traditionally a manufacturing and engineering nation. And so we have there very specific views about working in the same place and working from home. Like in a manufacturing company, you need people in the company. You can't do anything. There is a certain element of equality. They can, we are not, but there is also a lot of understanding that just the nature of the job doesn't allow. Personally, I don't have 50 years of practice, only 40, and 30 of them I worked as a CHRO, and I was lucky enough to start my work in a company named Philips. And Philips, in my early days, used a cooperation with the University of Nijmegen in the Netherlands, where they did a big program that was called Socio-Technical Task Analysis. And this has become a driver of socio-technical design of work. I think in these days, in the 80s, we learned that employees wanted to have more of a say and wanted to be listened to much more. And I'm very grateful for this experience. And I think it resonates in many companies, particularly in countries like the Netherlands, Germany, Scandinavia. What I love is two things, and then I give my question. Sorry for I love the metaphor about the broken neck. And it reminds me of a saying by John Grinder, who says, your body will send you signals. And if you don't listen to them, you will get symptoms. And when you still don't listen, then you will get disease. That's number one. And this is what we all have to look for. The other one is, Dr. Jana, I love what you said about status quo. For me, coaching and transformational leadership and status quo, it doesn't work together. Coaching and status quo, coaching is there to challenge the status quo and to move on to transform. And so now, finally, my question. Especially in the UK at the moment, maybe also in America, there is a lot of a big buzzword now is psychological safety. And I believe that without psychological safety, because it's at the bottom of our human needs, yeah, it comes pretty much above shelter and food and water. And if we don't have this in the workplace, we will not achieve results. We've seen since 2003, I think we've seen the agile movement. And we say we need to become more agile, we need to become more innovative. But when you're not allowed to ask questions, when you're not allowed to challenge the status quo in an organization, because you don't feel safe to do so, then this innovation drive won't work. So what's your take on this?
I mean, I think you're right on. I mean, I've been in communities, both professionally and personally, that weren't arguing or sharing displeasure. And that is the most unhealthy situation that you can have, whether they feel oppressed or suppressed or repressed, or if they're faking good, if everybody's just smiley all the time, that's as unhealthy as the other. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's foundational. I think it also speaks to the equity and diversity piece, because the capacity to take multiple perspectives, to honor and to acknowledge that I don't know your experience. That's a multiple perspective taking practice, and it honors the other in saying, you know, I mean, years ago when I was a therapist, I'd work with couples, and I would talk to one of the members of the couple and I'd say, how would you find out that piece of information regarding the other's experience? And sometimes they didn't have any answer to that. There's only one way to find out somebody else's experience. You can't look it up on the internet. You can't read it in a book. You have to ask them. You have to be vulnerable to not knowing and to be humble. I mean, to understand is to stand under, is to humble ourselves in the face of that not knowing. And I think that really is, for me, the core of psychological safety. And this where this arrogant knowing is crumbling. It's running itself into the ground.
Walter, ich habe in Augsburg gewohnt für 4 Jahre. So.
In Augsburg.
Yeah, so Germany is one of my home countries. But I think that where we're experiencing a great resignation now, the psychological safety factor is going to contribute to an ongoing great shuffle. Right? People are resigning, and we saw from the study that a lot of people are kind of quickly going back to different places. Grass is not always greener on the other side, but in search of psychological safety and having been given permission to privilege that level of protection for ourselves, people are going to be shifting jobs more frequently than we've ever seen before in search of, and you're quickly going to see sectors like the B Corp rise to the top, people who are giving leadership permission to privilege that well-being across the board of folks. So you're going to see a new kind of organization rise to the top, and people who are thinking about the environment, folks who are thinking about people, and really taking care of planet and community into consideration will quickly outperform. And I don't like focusing on metrics, but I think it's true. I think that they're going to outperform traditional organizations that want to maintain the status quo.
To add to that point, I think from a psychological safety perspective, many times we talk more from the employee standpoint. But one aspect that we also need to look at it from the leadership standpoint as well, because many a times the leaders are actually struggling with their own baggage, right? And it's like they say, it's lonely out there at the top. So I think leaders also should be given that permission to be vulnerable, to share their emotional crises or battles that they are going through, and it should not be seen as a sign of weakness, because generally a leader is always looked up to as somebody who's resilient, who's strong in all moments, but end of the day, they are also human. So I think the psychological safety aspect needs to also be looked at from the leadership point as well.
Absolutely. As we're speaking to the senior executive teams, and the vulnerable piece is pivotal in shifting everyone's mindset. Dr. Renee, is that her? Renee Brown.
Brene Brown, you got it.
She speaks about the courage of vulnerability, and her research finds that it's contrary to our old belief system. Actually, vulnerability does cultivate trust in the leadership, and so this is really important.